Hello, and welcome to the Diverse Pathways for Early Childhood. This is a free pathway training session for our latest tool and resource for 2026, which is the Rest, Flow, and Spark states. And this guidance is a mini curriculum that expands our understanding of regulation beyond calm, control, and compliance. My name is Kerry Murphy, and I am the founder of Diverse Pathways for Early Childhood, which is a collective of early years educators, specialists, parents, and carers who want to advance neurodiversity informed and affirming practice in the early childhood space. So I hope that you get a lot from this bite sized training and the tool and guidance itself. So let's jump in. Across this bite sized session, we are going to explore three goals. The first goal is to introduce rest, flow, and spark states and what is meant by rest, flow, and spark and why we think it is necessary for our early childhood sector. Goal number two is to think about how rest, flow, and spark relates to regulation and also expands our understanding of regulation. And then I'm going to talk very briefly about the different rest and spark states specifically, and you might want to pick up the guidance at that point where each rest and spark state is broken down into its own page with a description and the types of practical things that you can do to support this state of regulation within your early childhood space. I'm going to begin by talking a little bit about how rest, flow, and spark states came about. A few years ago, I came across a website called the NAP Ministry, which is led by Trisha Hersey, who has written an amazing book called Rest is Resistance. The work is very much rooted in anti racism and anti capitalism and very much focuses on the pressures for us to constantly be productive. So it was a book that I was reading for personal reasons, and I happened to also come across a TED talk by Sandra Dalton Smith, who talked about the 7 types of rest. It was a period in my own life where I was burnt out and overwhelmed and exhausted and constantly felt like I needed to be productive in order to be valued. And so both the NAP ministry and the 7 types of rest got me thinking about when does it start in our life where we are suddenly expected to constantly be switched on, to constantly be productive. And it coincided with a period of time where there was a lot of discussion about school readiness for our children and the deprivation of play. And so all these kind of moving pieces started to connect up. And I was also noticing at the time that there was so many conversations about children needing to be calm and having calm down corners and calm down spaces and how are we teaching calm. And very much this idea that we both needed to be simultaneously productive and conformist and compliant to what was expected of us as humans, both children and adults, but we had to always do that in a calm way, and that calm was becoming a synonym for regulated. And actually, when you don't feel calm as a human, it can be really difficult to then constantly be trying to achieve that state. And so, whilst I very much understood the premise and the intention of children feeling and experiencing states of calm, which can be lovely, actually, regulation to me felt so much more dynamic. And so I started to think about, from my own personal experience, how I could start to center rest and how I could start rather pushing back against this need to be constantly productive. And for me, I think that those lessons need to start and begin in early childhood. And so rest, flow, and spark has evolved over time because I myself had moved on from this idea that regulation just equals calm and is actually a much more fluid, a much more chaotic, a much more dynamic process. And actually, is it calm that we are looking for, or do we want children to have the capacity and the skills to be able to consciously and then unconsciously develop responses and right fit responses to what they need in the moment? So, rest, flow, and spark states was quite literally a response to the overemphasis and overuse of calm in our early childhood settings. Not only does calm impact our expectations of our children, but I also noticed with early educators and teachers when I was going into primary education that adults too are always expected to be calm, and we're always expected to be co regulating, and we're always expected to look like we are rational and have it all together and have it all figured out. And my concern in the sector is that that is depleting and exhausting us, and actually being calm all the time is just not a realistic state. We experience as humans different stress states, and we do require different responses to these. And so What I wanted to challenge with this mini curriculum and just my general stance is that we need to move on from the idea that regulation is about compliance and being calm. And we need to question anything that describes regulation as basically being able to follow instructions or to follow the demands of an adult or to be able to constantly have technical emotional control over ourselves. Children need access to multiple opportunities for regulation across many different states, including our sensations, our energy states, our emotional repertoire, our emotional or the development of our emotional intelligence. And so, what we don't want is to be training children into technical emotional responses. We want children to be able to really develop the skills to figure out what is happening internally, externally, environmentally, relationally for them, and then being able to find that right fit and that right match. And that is where rest, flow, and spark is just one aspect that you might consider. Hopefully, you are accessing the mini curriculum alongside watching this training so you can start to map out and think about how it might relate to your individual setting or context. But I just wanted to take a moment to think about what this mini curriculum is and what it is not. So, the first thing to say is that it is a tool that is meant to offer a springboard, a reflective space, an observational space for you to think about how does my setting make regulation accessible to the children and adults within your care. So you can use this not as a walkthrough or a technical guide. You can jump in and out and pick what relates to your current context, but it helps you and gives you a framework or a scaffolding for observation. It also guides reflections and explorations of your environment, your rhythms, and your routines. And it is a tool that is being written because we need to protect children's rights to regulation and to practice regulation within our early childhood settings. We're not just getting children ready for the next phase of education or the next phase of life. We're really wanting to meet them in the moment and to give them plenty of opportunities to practice, to tune into, to experience, to explore their bodies, the sensations they have in their bodies, the emotions that they experience, the regulation rhythms that they might go through. It's not about getting children to a place of like maturity immediately in terms of their emotional intelligence and regulation. It's about really teaching them about embodiment and what it feels to be themselves. What it is not. So it's not a checklist. It's not something that you go through and be like, right, I'm going to go into my space and look at where the areas of rest are and tick it off, and then boom, that's done, because these are evolving experiences. And it's not a behavior management tool. It's not about controlling children. It's about thinking deeply about what is accessible to your children. And it's not something you have to move through in order. You're meant to use it in a way that suits. So it's a pick and mix. It's a jump in, jump out. It's something that you can pick up or return to or go to when you're yourself feeling a little bit bewildered by what might be happening within your own individual context. So let's think about how rest, flow, and spark link to regulation. To do this, I'm going to first of all define what I mean by rest, flow, and spark. And then I'm going to talk to you about a term we have introduced in a book that I have written with Sarah Doyle, which is coming out next year or this year, 2026, The Building Blocks of Behaviour for Early Childhood. And we introduced a term called dynamic regulation. And dynamic regulation is essentially all the different types of regulation that might show up in an early childhood setting and how they link back into experiences of rest, flow, and spark. I think one of the most obvious points to make for children and adults is that being a human is busy work. Like, there are lots of demands on us at all times, and we need to be able to develop over our lifespan a repertoire of responses and strategies to how busy the world is around us. It can also be slow and beautiful and very transient, but generally, we know that as humans, we are often having lots of competing demands, particularly in modern societies where we also have the added pressures and delights of technology, of fast paced communication and immediacy and urgency. And so, for our children in the early childhood space, what we often promote is unhurried childhoods. We want childhood to be its own distinctive developmental phase. And we want children to have time to live in the moment, to develop their capacities and skills, to be very present, and to really gain a grasp and understanding of themselves. So, when I came to write the rest, flow, and spark states, what I wanted to recognize is that children have a right to different experiences that help them to feel well beyond just being calm. And so for me, having access to rest is a developmental right. Having access to flow and uninterrupted time is a right. And having access to embodiment, to energy, to spark states is a developmental right. So, what do we actually mean by these then? So, rest, essentially, we might think about it in terms of when we go to sleep or we have a nap, but it is so much more than that. And it is when our body, emotions, energy, and senses need a pause so that we can reset and feel steady, safe, relaxed, and less overwhelmed. Rest helps us to lower demands, to recuperate, to repair, to recover, to replenish, and return to balance and find comfort through soothing, predictable, and grounding experiences. So, when you are in your early childhood setting, you're not just getting children ready for the next phase of education or the next life experience, you're also teaching them how to look after themselves through rest beyond just going for a sleep or having a nap, although those things are very important as well. Flow states is when your body, emotions, energy, and senses are in a state of absorbed engagement where demands and supports are well matched and we feel immersed, steady, and connected. All humans should have access to their flow states where they're able to get lost in the moment, whether that be through deeply engaging with an interest, getting to play in a way that brings you joy, getting lost in the moment. It's those moments in your early childhood setting where the child is just able to be and they're able to pursue to their own agenda. They're able to inquire and self direct. They're able to relax into their play in a way where they're not frightened about what comes next or what routine or rhythm is going to interfere or interrupt. We know increasingly in early childhood spaces, because of the dominance of school readiness and top down pressures, that there is a greater emphasis on children being able to jump from routine to routine and to follow demand from demand. But actually, we need to really advocate for flow states in our early childhood space because we know they have benefits for not only our well being, but also our learning and development and also our sense of humanness, just being human and being able to be in the moment. And then spark states, this is when our body, emotions, energy, and senses need an activating boost so we can feel alert, engaged, and ready to explore. So, what we know in our early childhood spaces is that our children often have these spark states where they're suddenly full of energy and they're really seeking out movement based experiences. Or you might have a child actually that feels quite bored or restless and they need something that sparks their energy. They need something that really wakes them up. So, spark states help us build momentum, curiosity, and connection through energizing, activating, and stimulating experiences. So, the different states are essentially things that we should be thinking about. How are we providing these across any one day? Because these are children's rights and entitlements. And we can view this through regulation. Just to say as well, rest, flow, and spark states build upon other already identified theoretical approaches. So you might be really interested in the work of Mona Delahuck or Stuart Shanker, who talk about regulating up and regulating down and then maintaining your energy. So for rest states, we might think about regulating down. You've got too much going on in your mind and your body, and you're seeking that sense of ease or calm or soothing. Regulating up is that spark. It's when you want to feel immobilized and you need that boost of energy to be alert. And flow states and maintaining is where you're kind of really not plateauing, because that's not the right term, but you're in that space where you're just comfortable, you're just completely comfortable and you're immersed. So you might want to check out the work of Delahuck and Shankar. There's also Neff, who does a lot of work around neurodivergent nervous systems and how stress and regulation works for those individuals as well. I am going to attempt to keep this brief because we have written much more about it in the building blocks of behavior. But I think it really relates to conversations around rest, flow, and spark states. And that is the idea of dynamic regulation. So, one of the things that myself and Sarah spoke about when we were writing the building blocks of behavior is that the early years as a field is depleted and exhausted. And one of the reasons that we think that this is because it has been presented to us that in order for our children to feel well and to do well, we need to constantly be co regulating with them to teach them self regulation so that they are then ready for school and ready for life. And I think on paper, that sounds beautiful and wonderful, but it operates on the idea that we are endless wells of emotional energy. We have endless space to constantly be meeting every child's individual needs. And what we have picked up on is that actually co regulation is often used as a way of saying that we need to be able to go into a space with 30 children, say, for example, all with their own unique experiences, and we need to be able to co-regulate every child. And I think that there are bursts of that, and there should be lots of bursts of that, but that is not the constant experience of your children. So, what we found is that actually self regulation and co regulation are vitally, vitally important, and we need to develop them to the best of our ability. But they exist within a much broader network, and that much broader network is dynamic regulation. So, what do we mean by dynamic regulation? It essentially recognizes that regulation is happening all the time in different ways, and different regulation states are available to us at different points. So if I go into an early childhood environment and I am with my key child, I've got an individual knowledge of them. I know their emotional capacity. I know how they experience the world. I might go in and find that they are disgruntled, distressed, dysregulated. And based on my knowledge of that child, I will engage in quite an intimate process of co-regulation. They might be a child who really loves a big bear hug, or they like to go and sit and have some quality time together, or they need to move their bodies. So based on my knowledge in that moment, I am co-regulating with that child. However, I also have to acknowledge that I have a group of 30 children that need to be supported. And so there are times that co regulation might not be accessible to me in the moment because I need to think about collective regulation. So I might have a group of children that are feeling quite busy or quite stressed or low on energy or high on energy, and I might do something for the good of the whole group. So I might think I want to create a element of harmony within this space, and if I can create an element of harmony across the group, that is then when co-regulation can happen. So for me and Sarah, we feel that in our observations of practice, it's more about giving early educators the tools to move between their own different states. So, time to do your own self regulation and actively and consciously do it, time to engage in meaningful co regulation, but also knowing that sometimes you are going to have to do collective regulation. Say during a busy transition, you might think in that moment, I need to get children to do this from this, and for this moment, I just need that to be collective, but then I can really check in with those individual children. You've then got environmental regulation, which is how your environment supports you. In a lot of cases, we know our environments actually hinder our regulation capacity because they might be visually noisy, they might be cluttered or disorganized, the layout might not work, there might be lots of sensory input. So when we kind of almost create a network of regulation, a network of dynamic regulation, it gives us more opportunities of things that we might work on to create a more cohesive environment for children. And within that dynamic regulation exists your access to rest, not only for children, but also the adults, your access to flow states, not only for children, but for the adults, and access to spark states, not only for the children, but for the adults as well. And that is how we have developed the idea of dynamic regulation, and hopefully that might be useful to you as well. The other thing that we just wanted to draw your attention to, and an idea that we've written about in the building blocks of behaviour, is this idea of a regulating landscape. And this has been a really exciting conversation that we've had because it resonated with lots of the discussions we were having with early educators when we are out on training. Is that we will often meet educators who will give examples of behaviours that they find unacceptable or frustrating or annoying, and they're often looking for, how do I stop this type of behavior in my environment? And one of the things that we always talk to early educators about is, what is your landscape? Like, what are children actually seeing when they come into your environment? And what is being communicated by what they are seeing? Because that can often explain the behavior. So it's not that the child is misbehaving, it's that they are behaving in a way that the environment is communicated to them. So to give you a really obvious example, as you can see on the image here, this is an open space that has numerous rules on the wall. In this scenario, an educator likely vocalizes these rules continuously to children, but actually the landscape communicates something very different. So for most children, and actually for a lot of adults, you would not go into this space and think, oh, this is a place where I have to have walking feet, a quiet voice, and gentle hands, because it is an open space. It welcomes movement. So you might say you need to have walking feet, but actually the openness might communicate something very different. So we find that children regulate in response to the landscapes they see. Before any adult instruction, the environment is already communicating what bodies and minds are allowed, expected, or discouraged to do. So, an open, uncluttered space will invite speed and intensity and movement and expansion. not to compare children to my dog, but when I take my dog onto an open field, their instinct is to run because it's an open space and they love that feeling of freedom. So if I then said to my dog, stop running or come back here, or put them on the lead, I'm narrowing that dog's openness and freedom. So not comparing dogs to children, but if you've got an environment that communicates something to children and then children then behave in that way, we can't then blame the children. We need to think about, well, what is the landscape? And actually, even more than that, this is children telling us and showing us what they actually need. If I've got an indoor environment where children are running around all the time, I don't stop the running. I think I need to plan for running because that's what they need. So thinking about regulating landscapes is just a way of thinking about, what does your space invite the body and mind to do? What kind of energy does this environment assume or suppress? And do I need to be making more opportunities for different energy states? And are we asking children to override their bodily cues rather than designing spaces that actually support them in the first place? So when we're thinking about rest, flow, and spark, it's not about having one or the other, it's about having a balance across our spaces. So, what are the rest, flow, and spark states? A key question I am often asked when I talk about my issue with calm is, if we don't have calm down corners or calm corners, then what? And I think it's really important to say that if you have a calm corner or a chill out space or a cozy space and it works for your cohort of children and it's a space that they can safely go to and decompress and they can independently and autonomously access that, then you must continue with that because it works. The point in this particular training is about moving beyond the idea that regulation only happens in certain spaces. So, for some settings, unfortunately, you can go in and they'll be like, well, there's the calm down space, but there isn't much thought being given to how regulation is being supported across the environment, because regulation is happening all the time, everywhere. And so this isn't to say don't have a calm down corner, it's about expanding your regulation approaches to think and to also incorporate flow spaces, rest spaces, and spark spaces. So here is a really good point at which to open up the guide, and you can see a definition of each of how we describe rest and spark spaces. And we also give some practical ideas, but obviously you might personalize those based on your own experience. But just to say, when we think about rest, we're not just thinking about sleeping and napping, we're thinking about lots of different types of rest. When we're speaking about spark, we're not just thinking about running or moving or being heavily active, it's about activating or being able to use your energy in lots of different ways. So have a look through the guide, and something might jump out to you that might support you in your dynamic regulation within your early childhood setting. And this brings us to the end of this bite sized training. So it was a real quick drive through of rest, flow, and spark states, but hopefully has generated enough of an interest to explore this in greater detail. Obviously, you have the Padlet, which contains this training, it contains the actual mini curriculum and some signposts and resources. This training also includes an evaluation. We really would appreciate if you found it any use or you think it could be better, then please do let us know. And thank you for listening.